So the three closest decades would be the 2000s, the 1970s, and the 1940s. Those were generally the inflationary commodity boom decades. And obviously they had very different magnitudes. So the 2000s were considered a rather favorable decade. And part of why you had a commodity boom is that you had the rise of the quote unquote BRIC nations. So Brazil, Russia, India, China. You had a dollar weakness. And so that contributed to an emerging market boom, and they had a rapid increase in their commodity consumption at a time when commodity supplies were rather constrained. And so you had a big uptick in commodity prices, but it was generally for the most part a good thing, right? It was kind of not that those price increases were good, but that it was happening for rather good reasons. A lot, the world was in some ways booming. Now that eventually turned into the subprime mortgage crisis, and that also, high oil prices contribute to the recession we eventually had in 2008. And so by the end of that period, it was negative. But overall, that's kind of in some cases the best example you can think of. The one prior to that, the big commodity boom before that, would be the 70s, and that's where you had severe supply constraints because. So the United States found oil in the kind of the second half of the 1800s. We had almost a century of just constant increase in our annual oil production. Occasional, you dip, but it was a structural increase. And that peaked in 1970. So in 1970, U.S. oil production peaked and started to roll over structurally. At the same time as baby boomers across the world, including the U.S., were coming into home buying years. And so you had basically a lot of commodity demand, and you had limited commodity supply. So the United States became more reliant on Middle Eastern oil. And so that opened up all sorts of geopolitical conflicts, and shortages and inflation. And so that was a big issue. Now that part of why we had low commodity prices recently is because the U.S.'s structural decline in energy production reversed because of shale. So we added a lot of new energy to the world. That seems like it's probably behind us. Like we're still obviously producing a lot of shale, but we're not kind of rapidly increasing our shale production. We're kind of, maybe not at the limits, but we're closer to the limits in terms of how much annual oil production we can produce. But anyway, so you had 2000s, you had the 1970s, and if you go back before then, I've been using the 1940s as my closest macro comparison in terms of fiscal monetary policy. Kind of the reasons for inflation were more, in the 70s, the inflation was bank lending driven. You had demographics boom, and of course, fiscal added fuel to the fire. You had the guns and butter program, and you had Vietnam War, but a lot of that inflation was bank lending driven. In the 40s, a lot of it was purely war spending. So banks were not lending much. People had hardship, and a lot of the inflation and commodity price spikes you saw were obviously because of fiscal stimulus to support the war effort, right? So that was a very big year for commodities, and you had price controls, you had wage controls, you had kind of shortages. People had to substitute things. They're even, they would literally change what physical coins are made of to try to conserve, more important commodities. That's how extreme it gets in some of those decades. And so I do think we're going into, I've already been in the commodity bull market camp for the 2020s, and if we're going to have outright war, I've been using the 40s comparison. I always kind of say, hopefully there won't be the kinetic war. But now if we're actually moving into the kinetic war, then it's unfortunately even closer to the 1940s because you have those geopolitically driven commodity shortages. So I think we are in a rather challenging decade. Okay. And that was my view before the war, and the war just adds to that view. Now, I don't think it'll be a straight line. I mean, if you look at the 40s and the 70s, right, it's not like just inflation was just constantly going up the entire decade. You had periods where it looked like it was getting better, and then it would get worse again, and then it would get better again, then it would get worse again. And so my base case would be to see the 2020s do the same thing, where, there might, high commodity prices can eventually trigger recession and hurt demand for commodities. And then you can get a cool off in prices, and then you can get stimulus, and then you can get higher, you can get another uptick in terms of their prices. And so I think this will be cyclical to some extent, but I think that the structural backdrop will be one of less abundance. We can kind of characterize, so the past 25 years have been characterized by abundance in the sense that, the world was able to just sacrifice, we didn't have to worry about resiliency. We just, supply chains were emphasizing efficiency over resiliency. Everything was just-in-time delivery, lean manufacturing. Do everything you can to, minimize your inventory because that's efficient, and it boosts your return on invested capital for a company.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
Do you want to know one thing about crypto? I made over 3000% in profit in a few weeks. Fact is, the traditional financial system, the traditional money system makes you poor, not rich. If you want to earn $500,000, $1 million, you have to wait until you're 50, 60, 70 in the traditional financial system, and you probably will still be broke. And you will be old. This is not a sexy combination, as you can imagine. But the question is, how can you start in crypto and make these profits? Where to invest? Where to start? My name is Gunnar and I'm from Germany, as you can hear, and things are a little bit different in Germany. More about that later on. Fact is, there are lots of different cryptocurrencies. It's a gigantic universe where beginners and professionals get easily lost. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. There are 7 key steps you need to follow to become successful in this market. You have to know them, and if you fail one of them, it's literally impossible to succeed in this market. Just an example, one of the key points is your exchange, and one of the biggest are, for example, Binance and Coinbase. These are trusted and well-established exchanges, but, and this is a big but, you won't find the super profitable coins on those exchanges. The unknown super profitable coins that get gigantic profits are not traded on those kind of exchanges. They are traded on much smaller insider platforms that are barely known. And I can tell you what those super secret exchanges are and why they are so profitable. And another super important thing are the right information sources. The point is, the internet is gigantic. There are hundreds and hundreds of YouTube channels, blogs, pages, and much more. And there are also market makers and influencers. For example, Elon Musk, he is not a crypto guy, but the moment he recommended Dogecoin, it went through the roof, to the moon, so to say. But why did he recommend it? Where did he hear it from? He didn't hear it from newspapers. And believe me, he is listening to someone. But you have to know who, and you have to react before he is reacting. This is really, really important. And these are only 2 of the 7 steps you have to follow in order to be successful in crypto. And if you want to know all of these steps in much more detail, and if you want to have a comprehensive checklist, here's what you should do. There is a link below this video. Click on this link and you will get the opportunity to subscribe to my channel. Click on the link and you will see a video where I explain the next steps. So see you soon. Click on the link now. I'll see you there.